All right, and we are recording, so we can get started.
Right. I know at least one other person is on this document right now looking at the performance standards. That would be Jordan, I guess. Oh, and Patrick, are you on there too? All right. And so I started moving some of what Dana had written just into them, so it would be a little bit cleaner to review. Where we left off last time was kind of saying we want kind of the basic, most important standards. Nothing too complicated, but like 10 or 11, somewhere around then, that kind of covered the most straightforward and direct things that we needed in this, and that however this is implemented in the future, there may be other policies that could be added onto it, but these are like the practice standards that are kind of the basic things. That seem like what we agreed on?
And Annie, do you want to, if we're going to look at documents, do you want to screen share so they get captured into the recording?
Yes. All right. And just a reminder, if people have multiple screens, you can hit the pop out button, and that should, you can make it bigger in that manner. So, should we just start going through these? All right. So the one for standard one, client confidences. This to me looks pretty good. Welcome, Tara. We're just going through the document here, starting with standard one. Anyone have any comments, questions on client confidences, on this being included? Should this be here? Should this not be here? Okay. Raise your hand if you think we should leave this as is and leave it in the document. Great. Let's move on to number 2, the CLE, or continuing education. Dana, can you do this for PCRP case managers right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it works okay for y'all?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, that's what our practice routines say. And then, yeah, same language as we have in our practice principles. It works. I think that we've typically encouraged folks to attend the OCDLA conferences, but just because it's relevant to Oregon, but it's not always relevant to our practice. So there's flexibility in how they can, choose that continuing education, which I think is important.
Patrick, what do you think about this requirement here?
I think that looks good. It's as somebody who's outside of the PCRP structure, it's been a little bit I don't know, hit and miss. I try to go to the OCDLA specific conferences, but Dana's right. They don't always meet our needs, but I mean, that looks good to me.
Cool. And I added kind of something in here on this section. I said ABA trainings whose subject matter is relevant to the practice area.
Well, sorry to speak to that. What kind of keyed me in on that is Dana last year had mentioned to me about an ABA conference that they had in Denver that was just is incredible. I wish everybody who does case management or social work could go because it was really specific to everything that we do. And the ABA put it on, and just I've been digging a little bit deeper, and the ABA really does have a lot of good stuff. That was just what kind of flipped that switch for me to put that in there.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, I think it's great to include those because I do think it's more relevant to our practice, as case managers, social workers. And I think that, yeah, I mean, it's national best practice. So those are really good. They put on really good trainings.
All right.
do we want to leave out the CLE language and just go with generic trainings? I don't know if there are trainings for case manager social workers that wouldn't be CLEs, but I could see where those would qualify.
You mean just put like includes all identified OPDC trainings, OCDLA trainings,
Mm-hmm.
just take out the word CLA.
Yeah. Because I could see where we would put on a training specific for case managers and social workers that the bar wouldn't consider a CLE.
Yeah, oh, I see Michaela has her hand up too.
I just like the idea of taking out that CLE because I've done a lot of really great trainings that don't offer the CLE, but are really relevant to like things that we as case managers and social workers do, like around, you know, engagement strategies and advocacy strategies. But once we started adding CLE in there, that's usually then when we have to pay for it. And I found really great trainings that are relevant but don't offer that specifically.
Let's remove it. Oh, Patrick, go ahead. I'm gonna say something
I
different.
mean, I was just gonna be in agreement with Michaela, because I mean, here locally, there's pretty robust training that's multidisciplinary, that's really good, that aren't CLEs, but are put on by, you know, the local service providers or in conjunction with parole and probation. And it's, you know, they have a couple a year that are really specific to what we do. So I don't know about everybody else. I was just gonna, I don't know, agree with Michaela there.
What about, it sounds to me actually like we may need to broaden this language a bit, and it may be that we say, or other approved trainings, something, you know, because I think we want to make it broad, but we also want to be a little careful of people just going off and doing all sorts of stuff. But maybe it's, you know, you can almost like you could get pre-approval for it to qualify or understand if it would qualify. Michaela, go ahead.
Way
Do you want to
later,
add?
earlier, but would you then put in who they would get the pre-approval from?
I mean, I think
Yeah.
it would just be agency approval at this point, and it would be, you know, there's a lot of pieces of this that have not like that need to be cleaned up in that respect. Like, so
Yeah, I think we have in other parts of it, like agency or other designee or someone designated by the agency.
welcome, Becca. We're just kind of going through these one by one. We agreed with standard 1 kind of as is, and we're talking about standard 2 and removing the references to legal education and then expanding it to include any other approved, you know, other, I don't know, something programs could be approved, can be approved by the agency or their designee, to not limit.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's such large legal teams within the firms that there are a lot of people available to be teaching some of the legal aspects, whereas having experience in other areas is helpful when there isn't as big of a team.
All right, so let's take out. How should we use other? But other trainings relevant to this work may be approved by the agency or a designee of the agency. Sentiment good there. Maybe will be wordsmithed at a later date, but does the sentiment seem good there? Okay. Anyone want to make any changes or comments to to this?
Only thing, I mean, we haven't required this in under the PCRP model to seek approval. If it's, we kind of allow our case managers and social workers to determine what trainings are relevant to their practice. So I just want to throw that out there when we think about a large number of folks doing this across the state. And if they're, just the amount of work that it would take to be approving these on a one-by-one basis.
That is a good point. How about other trainings relevant to this work may also qualify if you have may qualify. Because the only thing I could see here is that I guess this isn't limiting language, but the way it's written right now is kind of saying it includes that, but there is no limit. So I want to get across in there that other things could be relevant and that they could take.
I think if we're going to have an or other section, we needed who decides what qualifies language. So I think we need it in there. I agree it's going to be a ton of work, but you got to do.
Well, and this is also where we could, in theory, have a designated list of things that are approved, and that as things are brought to our attention could be added to the list, and then, kind of figure it out that way.
What about if we start with using lists from like board approved trainings? Like things you're trying to figure out what trainings would count as additional experience.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to figure out how we're going to do it now, just whether or not we're going to say OPDS or OPDC or a designee gets to be the call on approval.
Okay. Are we content enough with this standard 2? Great. Not hearing anything else. Let's move to standard 3. Case manager / social work orientation. All will participate in a program and practice introductory training with the Oregon Public Defense Commission or its designee. So yeah, within 30 days of hire contract effective date.
Annie, is there something like that available right now?
For PCRP, Dana and Shannon do this.
Is there an equivalent in the criminal world?
Not yet. So I think, Dana or Shannon might be able to better address why this is important, because I would just be kind of parroting what they've told me. And I think probably probably offices like yours give this orientation and training to begin with, of people, for example, have never been involved in the system, need an orientation to the system before jumping in. I think that's but maybe Dana, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, no, that you're right. I mean, that's what we've done for our independent contractor folks, and we've offered it to in-house providers as well. So, yeah, but I think that most of the in-house folks are just trained in-house.
And what do you guys cover in that basic training?
Oh, lots of things. I mean, I think the most important thing for me is like the integrity of the role of just, making sure that we have consistent practice across our jurisdictions. So we have lots of different modules that are included in there around client confidence, working as an agent of a lawyer, mandatory reporting stuff, a lot of the things that we're covering in these performance standards. It's basically a general review of our practice principles.
Sarah, go ahead.
As well with witnessing, going and witnessing like different types of hearings. Because it was like a week-long orientation in a sense of getting to know, because it's just criminal defense in itself is a whole new process for a lot of people, and like the language and the just what it looks like in general. And so was kind of like a week-long orientation when it came to, witnessing different hearings and stuff like that.
Patrick, as somebody not connected to PCRP or a contract, what do you think about this type of thing? I imagine it will be a free training if it was put on. So
I think it would be really helpful for somebody just stepping right in, because, unless they're stepping right from like the child welfare world or on the criminal side, I don't know, coming from parole and probation or the court system, but I think that I just don't know what it would look like. It would probably have to be something online, correct? Or maybe shadowing another case manager. But I'm just starting, I'm thinking of like smaller counties where there's like, if there's only one case manager, there's nobody to shadow. But
I would
am I
think it would-
making any sense? I'm kind of jumping all over the place here, but I think that like an orientation would be great. I just like who's going to give it, and what venue is it going to be in?
Yeah. So Patrick, I'm following you, but I'm not sure that's a guarantee that it makes sense these days. Yeah. But I just wanted to let folks know there's a push from our team here to increase the number of virtual trainings that OPDC does. And I think this could easily be lumped in with that. But again, I don't know that we need to get too far into the how to do it section of the discussion, just the should we do it or should we require it? If that makes
Okay,
sense.
well, can I shorten my answer to yes? I think we should, because I think it would,
Okay.
it really would, it absolutely would be helpful.
Michaela, go ahead.
I would agree that we should, because even when I came onto this job, I had child welfare experience, quite a bit of it. But there's a lot that's different in any other social work position I've had than this job. And so Shannon and Dana were really great around like teaching like how it's different and why it's different. And so we can't leave that part out for new case managers, because it is very different working underneath an attorney's license than, with the mandatory reporting and the attorney-client privilege, and like how differently you should keep your records and monthly service updates and like how we're tracking data. Like all of that was in the orientation that I took, which is all essential to the job. So I definitely don't think we could ever leave it out.
I got Lee and then Tara.
Yeah, I think this sounds like a good idea. My only, I don't know, not even really a concern, more of a point, is that I think for a lot of social workers and case managers, this will be requiring them to engage in a training or orientation process that doesn't currently exist. We might be able to throw something together at my firm. It'll probably fall to Becca. And I think if this is something we want to require, it's probably something that the agency should offer, especially for people who won't have like in-house training up or orientation opportunities. And I'm thinking specifically of criminals, since this is offered in the PCRP world.
And I would, sorry, this is Tara. I would agree with Lee. That was kind of what I was gonna say was, I mean, there's not already something there, so already in place. So as far as the criminal world goes, I think it's a great idea, but there's just nothing in place yet. So is it something that we should be adding in there right now, or should we wait until there is something and then we can always add it in later?
I would say I suspect it'll be easier to have it in a standards document as an impetus to get it developed rather than the other way around.
Dana, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think that, yes, there's obviously specialty, practice in criminal defense. That's different than juvenile in the way that our practice is structured. But I think the training that we offer really is about the role of a case manager or social worker in defense teams. So I think that what we currently have could be easily modified to offer some introductory training to folks working in criminal defense cases.
And I agree with Jordan. I think we should, if this is important, like the idea of working within these teams, I'm thinking of the individual person and who's not associated with anything. I think we would really want to grab those people into something that orients them so that an attorney that is connected with them is not responsible for that kind of education, because they might, it might be all over the map on that, how effective that is. So
yeah, and I'll just add that, I don't think lawyers, especially when they're, having this person work under their license, they want to know that this person has had some sort of onboarding orientation training before they just assign them cases, at least under that consortia panel attorney model.
Does this sound so? All right, let's say, does anyone want to change anything on this? All right, are we good to leave this in as is and continue to the next one? That looks like enough nods and nobody saying anything for us to move on to standard 4, which has no information on it. Case manager and social worker to attorney ratios. I meant to pull up before we started the Moss Adams study, which let me see if I can do that now, that I think discusses this. Does anyone have any information or thoughts on kind of what this would look like? And I think let's start with what it really should be, and then we can talk about kind of from there what we want to put in as a part of this performance standard thing.
Well, I think I talked about this a little bit at our very first meeting, but at my firm, we've got 4 PCRP attorneys and 1 in-house PCRP case manager. And even with what seems like that small number or ratio, our PCRP attorneys are still referring case management work out to contractors. So 4 to 1 isn't, or 1 to 4 isn't cutting it in PCRP. And like I mentioned in the first meeting, a lot of our PCRP clients are babies, children, people that don't necessarily need case management services, whereas in adult criminal, almost all of our clients could benefit from them in some way. So I'm thinking the ratio should be less than 1 to 4. So maybe like 1 to 3 or 1 to 2. I know that's a tall order, and I'm, engaging in a bit of fantasy here, but that's my initial thought on the case manager to attorney ratio. And then
you landed on the Moss Adams ratio of 1 to 3.
Oh, wonderful! I should have read that study. And is that specific? I don't have that in front of me, but is that specific to case management, or does it not differentiate between social work and case management?
It is for a mental health professional, often a social worker, 1 to 3. And I posted it's table 14, but I posted it in the chat.
That's kind of what I was going to say, is this has been a bit of a harder question for me to answer because without the roles being defined in terms of what kinds of cases we're going to take, differentiating between the social work and case manager role. Because I know, if social workers maybe are taking some of the more complex needs clients, having a lower ratio is better just because those cases take up so much more time. So I don't know if we're going to differentiate between the 2 positions also.
I saw Dana unmute and then Patrick's hand go up. So Patrick, go ahead.
Well, I think one of the things to think about here too is like with the ratios is that's related to caseloads, and maybe somewhere having something about what kind of standard we're going to have for cases that case managers and social workers are going to take, and not just everything. Because I run into that here where I have attorneys that are just like, here, take this person, and you end up with a high caseload and less quality time to spend on those important cases. So maybe developing something to like a floor for that, so that you see what, like, they're all related. Case manager, social worker to attorney ratio, and caseloads for case managers. I don't know. That was just my thought.
Yeah, definitely. Dana, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think along those same lines that Patrick's saying is, I think, just referral criteria. I mean, we've for 10 years done the 1-to-3 ratio. It generally meets the needs in our jurisdictions. I will say that we all know cases have been more complex over time. So, for the first time in the history of PCRP, we have wait lists in most jurisdictions. So I think we see, attorneys wanting to utilize the resource more than we have available. But I definitely think that along these lines comes some sort of referral criteria, so we can really identify what cases are appropriate cases to send to case managers and social workers.
Tara.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I clicked raise my hand.
Okay. Michaela, go ahead.
I agree with Dana. I think like if you're keeping it broad, that 3-to-1 works really great. I think maybe the more nitty gritty is like what cases are appropriate. I think right now it's like 10 to 15% of an attorney's caseload they can refer for PCRP. Maybe then we say like only 5% can be for the social worker. So like they're having to put more thought into which case goes where alongside the like referral criteria. But I feel like that's more detailed than what we're trying to perhaps accomplish today. I think that 3-to-1 is pretty good. But yeah, I do agree that we definitely need to look at caseload sizes and then look at that number again. But I do feel like that ratio is pretty comfortable.
Tara, now you got your hand up. Is that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So on my team, some people are comfortable with 15 to 25 cases, and some people are comfortable with 25 to 35 cases. And then when you're in the criminal field, you have a lot of absconds or no way to contacts, and so keep it in mind that your caseload is gonna ebb and flow when it comes to the volume and how many people are actually in contact with us. I think case managers and social workers have the ability to have and should have smaller caseloads because we're also more hands-on with our clients. And so, just giving grace when it comes to the social workers and case managers, giving them a little grace when it comes to their caseloads, but keeping in mind that I can handle a 35-person caseload. That doesn't mean that all 35 are actively talking to me, but I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, right? Especially as somebody who's newer to the work, their caseload looks different than somebody who has more experience. And sometimes you pick up those cases that are just really hard, and that makes your ability it fluctuates, and that makes sense. One thing I think is interesting here is that we've just made the assumption in this conversation that we just don't have enough people, so we need to set the ratio to something reasonable. But hypothetically, if we just said like Lee, how many attorneys do you have in your office?
I believe we have 33, 4 of which are PCRP. So I would say we've got 27 attorneys doing adult criminal work.
So,
And
but
we've
let's
got-
take 33, right? That would mean for 3 to 1, like 10, 11 folks there, right? Like, imagine if you guys had 10, I guess you have 1, so you've had 9 more of those people in your office doing this work. I guess you have more because you have Becca and I don't know anyone else there, but like that would be like, I can't even math it out how many more that would be adding, right? So I think, and I also think kind of to your point, Becca, like, are we going to separate this out to social worker versus case manager? If we're using this broad ratio to encompass both, it may be that this is the standard that we set in general and that the caseloads themselves do not necessarily mean a social worker is 3 to 1 and a case manager is, you know, it could be that it's a little bit different in how that kind of shakes out. But when we're generally looking at this, it's about a 3 to 1 ratio. Because I think people are going to kind of self-select. Well, what I envision and kind of what we've talked about is a lot of this will be a referral will come in and it's kind of like, this is more of a social work one. This is more of, you know, this kind of expertise. This is this kind of a thing. At least that's what I'm seeing. So Becca, go ahead.
I don't exactly know the language to use for this, but something I've thought about was that I would love to leave some of it up to the firms in general, because every county, and I am thinking more broadly in the terms of more rural areas. I mean, some places where, say, someone needs a referral into a shelter and they call the one shelter that day. Do you have any beds today? No. Tomorrow they call the same shelter. Whereas here, someone may need a shelter and it's taking hours, days to actually access a bed. And so because the needs across the state are going to look so differently, it's really hard to put a blanket statement or a blanket number. And so I'm wondering if there's some way that we can leave at least a little discretion. Or does that complicate things too much?
I guess I would say keep in mind that this is essentially a talk about funding. And if we say we'll fund it 3 to 1 and Metro or whatever wants to fund it more than that, they can do that through the kind of traditional method of divvying up what their contract payment is into however they want to do it. We're still not going to tell the firms you can only do this. It's just, you know, we'll fund you at this ratio. You want to go below that or above that? Not sure which way ratios work. If you want to have more social workers per attorney, that's your business.
Michaela, do you have something to add in there?
I was thinking of language. You could always put like, you know, this study reports that best practices would be a 3 to 1 ratio. I mean, that could be like the language that it, but then after what Jordan's comments were, I think, you know, I would agree then just keeping it 3 to 1 if that's not going to like hold anybody to that. There's some flexibility there for firms to decide.
I guess the other thing we could do is something similar to what we've done in attorney contracts, which is to require that social workers adhere to ethical workload standards as the standard, and then we can figure out separately from the standard what that means. It's kind of a kick the can down the road thing, but that might be what we should do.
Although, oh, go ahead, Dana.
Well, I was just going to say, in one of the notes, I did put in a recommendation around workload, just what Jordan says, like, you know, they should not accept workloads that by reason of size or complexity interfere with their ability to meet professional obligations to each client.
So what if we did a kind of a combination of almost like the 3 to 1 is like the appropriate ratio of attorney is 3 to 1 However, something like that. Does that seem
I
fine?
think that sounds good. I think the other thing we were always told in the PCRP model is to not, to encourage attorneys to continue to refer clients, even if they're going to be on a waiting list, because that demonstrates the need, which is what OPDC would need to be able to increase funding or change the ratios. We don't need to include that here, but I think it's a good way to, not limit our referrals.
All right, any other comments or things we want to talk about on this one? Seem reasonable? All right. The one, sorry, I wanted to a little bit go off script here, and do the kind of the conflict check, because this was addressed in Melissa's comment on this one, where you wrote this, Dana. Like, do we need a separate conflict of interest thing, kind of to say, a case manager will not work on, cases that create a conflict of interest, and then kind of lay out a little bit more, right? In-house, that's not going to be an issue, but for independent contractors, they can't take the mom on one case and then the kid on the same case. I mean, that's a crazy example, but things of that nature. Co-defendants, they couldn't be a case manager for co-defendants.
Yeah,
people feel,
I think it'd be really important to include that. And I think even in our manual, we have things around, because we often get folks that come to us from child welfare. And so we want to address the potential conflicts they have from previous employment.
do we have that language in the CRP?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, I think if we want to just keep the language general somehow here in standard 5, and then just, around social workers, case managers will, be diligent about the potential for conflicts. If conflicts would arise, they will staff with the attorney who has the final authority. Or
Okay. Do you have that in front of you? That I would need to find it again here.
the language from the practice principles, or just,
Yeah, if you want to throw it. Oh, I just pulled it up here so I can kind of
okay.
grab it. Here it is. All right. Oh, wow. It's long in here. So here, I'll just copy this over and then we can kind of see if it makes sense or doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it's quite wordy. And I mean, I think like ours is specific to ODHS, but I mean, I think that that language could include just other previous employment. Like if you're coming from a community mental health, you know, and you've had that person on your caseload in another professional capacity.
This is the part I hate. I don't like doing stuff in front of y'all, having to write things on the spot. Does anyone think that we should not have this piece in here? And not necessarily how it's written now, but just some piece on conflicts that says you can't, you know, you either have to identify some language around this to prevent people from knowingly taking conflict stuff. Okay, so what I think we should do is go through the rest of them and then kind of come back and wordsmith it, or if somebody wants to do that kind of as we go, we'll figure out what language this should do. But I think from what we've talked about, it does make sense to cover, you know, not to accept current conflicts, you know, based on your current caseload or previous professional relationships. The other piece that's in here, I don't know if the other professional activities, is the purpose of this was like people who are doing similar work in a different form, like, or was it more about, what's the purpose of this one, Dana, of the other professional activity here?
I need to look. So Annie, are you pulling from page 18 in our manual?
I was looking at 16, I think.
Okay. Just because I knew that there was other language. Oh, I don't know. So ask me the question again, other professional activity. There's another section, I think, in our manual that talks about client conflicts that I just wanted to make sure that that was all included too. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was distracted by many things.
Oh, it's in the referral section.
Yeah.
That before accepting a case, the case manager does basically a conflict check. Yeah.
Yep. And then like not more than one party, you know, which I know some of it isn't relevant with the firms, but yeah, there's a lot.
But that is relevant. Like if you're a case manager for a child in one case and their parent picks up a criminal thing, you know, true. And it's a child welfare case, you would not want that case manager on the criminal matter for the parent for the most part. I think yeah.
What about an adult, say, like if you're coming from one organization where you worked with a client and then you're working with the firm and they come through and they become a client of the firm and that you had like a decent working relationship with them in the past, is that still a conflict?
Same person, right? So no, that would be fine. Yeah. This is like kind of based off of this, yeah, similar to like kind of what the attorneys have to deal with this all the time too. The hard part is if you move, like if you're a DHS worker and you move to a firm, how do you make sure you're not working on something that you maybe worked in your professional capacity as DHS, right? Because you would have information from that job that's privileged. So it's kind of things of that nature. So I think, I'm just going to copy this little piece here, and this will be wordsmithed at some point, but I can't do it with all of you guys watching me, so I'm not going to do it now.
I mean, I think there's definitely the way that we can reduce this language, because essentially, I mean, all potential conflicts need to be staffed with a lawyer because they're the ones that make the authority around it. So I think that we can give some kind of hypothetical situations in longer manuals like this, but I feel like there can be some shorter language that's just around like what a conflict is, and if one arises or the potential for one, that you're staffing the issue with the referring attorney.
Well, I think, right, it needs to be both on disclosing if somebody is on like getting the referral, and then, yeah, I agree. It will be shorter than this, but you are welcome to start working on that if you'd like, Dana, or somebody else can. Just because I want to get through these other ones and then we can kind of go back to it. I'm just gonna move these to the bottom here. Because I think the other ones are easy, things that are fine to deal with first. So just ignore the numbers. Mandatory reporting. Any thoughts on this? This was a language that Dana had included.
I think this one is tricky unless we have some Oregon specific language. Because if you look at, you know, the ethical requirements for a licensed social worker, it's going to conflict with, you know, we have that NAPD formal opinion, but we've had licensed social workers that, you know, there's a conflict when they feel like they need to report under their license and the attorney doesn't want them to report because of confidentiality. So
Yeah, I was curious about that from after reading that from the NAPD, if there is anything from ASWB that confirms that that's accurate, or that they also are in agreement with that.
yeah, I don't know that. It'd be good to find out.
I mean, I think either way, like this is important to be in there because it both alerts anyone who is a social worker, they already know, but I think attorneys may, in my experience, in practice, I just assume everything is covered in my office by attorney-client privilege. And so this would, you know, I think that's an important piece of this to be aware of. If we don't have a formal opinion, everything I would say, I did read at other states, and this was flagged as an issue to like in other states to say, if you do not have an exception or be aware of your state's requirements around mandatory reporting, because this may become problematic and conflict like within the team over what needs to be reported. So there was in one of the things we did have, like, I think OPDC put forward a memo. Was that just the NAPD one, Dana? I thought it looked like it was maybe written by.
No, that was written by
By
Nora
Nora.
Van Dusen. Yeah, so that was an OPDC memo.
Right. And
I think what we always did, and that was specific, I mean, what I've used it as a tool to, if the issue of testimony comes up, I think that case manager, social worker, attorney should be reviewing that memo before they're making decisions around having their case manager or social worker testify.
oh, so that one was more, sorry, specific to testimony.
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look back at it, but that's how I've used it. I don't know about mandatory.
So I think at this point, I would be fine leaving this in as is. And kind of noting for us that we need to kind of follow up with social work stuff in Oregon and elsewhere to understand kind of the nuance that we can have here. How does that sound? Because I think this is also would key when you might not want a social worker versus a case manager. Right. standard role of social worker or case manager. So, yeah. What is this? Oh, this is where we did the workload stuff here. Do we want to have anything in here about kind of their role within the defense team, or has that been kind of will be clear enough elsewhere? Do we need this basically, or can I delete it?
I don't think we need it. I think we have it in the position description. But I don't know what other people think.
Anyone disagree? Like deleting things. Well, I'll highlight it because there's Melissa's comments there. So we'll just highlight that as a different color because red is distracting. Or yellow is distracting. But I don't know, that just looks highlighted. All right, standard 8 while I mess with this. Do we want anything about limitations on what types of things people can do or not do? Or should we just take this out?
This isn't my wheelhouse. I would vote for taking it out just because I feel like this runs the risk of limiting case managers and social workers from doing something they might view as necessary. But I shouldn't be the one to weigh in too hard on this. I just don't want to limit their work.
Well, and I know, and Becca's
I
always
also-
made the good point of like, a lot of the work that y'all do is therapeutic in nature, even if it's not a direct service. And so that gets confusing here. Sorry, Jordan.
I think.
Oh, I was just gonna
sorry.
say, I also want to make sure, I agree with Lee that the attorney should not be the one to make this call. But I just want to be sure that there's not a need for it to prevent attorneys from trying to put social workers into situations where they're being pressured to do unethical things. And I don't know if providing therapeutic services in this setting would be considered that, but that's the only reason I can see to leave it in.
Yeah, I mean, I think having it just so brief there, like, I don't know if we really need it. I do think it's really interesting territory and a larger discussion, but would probably require a lot more in figuring out the details and logistics of it all than we're going to have time for here. So, I mean, maybe leaving it out for now as this is building and growing.
I mean, part of the thing here too that we have to remember is that it is at the attorney's direction. And so, you know, ideally an attorney would not be asking that as well. And so there is a limit, I guess, already. So I'm fine taking this out or like highlighting it to remove. Great. Good job. Professional liability insurance. Social workers carry and maintain professional liability insurance if working outside of an office or firm that provides insurance for employees. Patrick, I want to get your thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that needs to be in there. I mean, I carry business professional liability insurance. It was kind of difficult to find someone who would provide what I exactly needed, but I mean, you're not only exposing yourself, I imagine you're exposing OPDC if you're acting irresponsibly as a case manager. But yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Any other comments or like anything else on this? Are we good to just move on? Thumbs up, we're good. Cool.
Well, do we need to put anything about minimum limits of how much you need to carry, or is that anything that we even want to deal with right now? I mean, is there a standard? Because
Yeah, every time I've gotten it, there's like the default of the 1 million, 3 million. I feel like that's sufficient. There's not really a whole lot of options when I've looked around. It's like super high or it's just that 1 to 3.
All right. Moving on then, standard 10, communication with persons represented by counsel.
I like it word for word.
All right. Any other comments on this one? We're good with it as is. I guess I'll put a space in there. All right, record keeping. I think we just need maybe some language like must maintain. Do they have to must maintain client records? Or something like, I guess it just seemed like a weird jump in to just say client records are clearly identified.
Can you say client records must be clearly identified as attorney work product?
Patrick, go ahead.
yeah, is there a time limit? Is there a legal standard for a time limit of how long that, as a case manager, I'm supposed to maintain these records, or do I just send them to the attorney when when my involvement with the case ends?
Well, the statute of ultimate repose of 10 years is sort of the governing principle for keeping client files. I, I, I suppose that would be a good rule for case manager and social worker records as well. My thought is that um, I should this be just another situation where the case manager or social worker defers to the attorney in terms of like file or record retention? Maybe it should be. And then my other thought is that when we say that the records must be clearly identified as attorney work product, what exactly are we what kind of requirement are we creating there? Are we saying that case managers and social workers have to label documents as attorney work product? So I wouldn't want to do that necessarily.
We do require that for our independent folks. Just with like a header, but yeah, I see what yeah, I know that that looks differently in a firm.
Well, and I think too, this speaks to one of the differences of like case managers are not testifying in court, are not in PCRP at least. Yeah, and like the attorneys may use their work to create other things or adopt some of their work to, put forward to the court or elsewhere. So maybe this should just be a more, generic, like, they should maintain client records. I guess the issue is if they're going to be subject to discovery or request. So that's kind of the workaround, right, for in PCRP that it is not discoverable because it is attorney work product. So I don't actually have an answer to this one either.
Whether something constitutes attorney work product isn't determined by whether you stamp something at the top of a document that says attorney work product. So I'm an advocate for a more flexible approach in this standard 11.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I just that must maintain records. I'm guessing this was, yeah. So what is it? Must they maintain client records? I was thinking at the end of the case, if they send them to the attorney, then there may be less of a need to store them themselves, because that does add up over time to store a lot of client records. So I don't know, but I don't know how we, or if we want to add a maintenance and maintain those records for a certain amount of time.
I like your idea of putting it onto the attorney to maintain the records, because ultimately, I mean, unless there's, I don't know, some professional standard I'm not aware of for like licensed social workers maintaining records for some period of time. It's really the attorney's ethical obligations that govern how long the records need to be maintained. And I would be in favor of taking some labor off of the case managers and social workers, putting it onto the attorney or the law firm and making them the keepers of the record, given that it's their obligation that governs how long to keep it in the first place.
Yeah, I like that.
So maybe something like this, like the wording, again, not great, but they must maintain client records and maintain those records throughout the duration of their work or worth of their work with the client. Upon closing the case, they must provide the client records to the attorney to become a part of the attorney's file. Something like that.
Yeah, that looks good. How do y'all case managers and social workers feel about a must fork it over at the end thing though? I just, I don't want to make more work for anybody.
Yeah, I think that would be fine. I know in our firm, like I maintain my own files in my office, and client files, and put most of it in our electronic file, and could potentially put it in then our file room. So that's how it works in the big firm. I don't know how it works in terms of the smaller places, but it sounds good to me.
We could also change it to deleting or removing client files. They must provide them to the attorney. So for, best practice, something like you should send them over and you don't delete or remove them until the attorney has a copy or something.
I think that's a good workaround, yeah. Or must provide to or must provide to the attorney upon request. Because I mean, if the attorney needs the record for some reason, I think they should be entitled to it, given that the case manager or social worker is working as their agent.
Destroy their records until they have been something like that. Okay, general ideas.
I would use received by instead of transferred.
Right. Anything else on that one? Again, I might wordsmith it a little bit more later and we'll clean up the CMSW stuff throughout. Generally good to move on? Cool. All right, this is one. This is the one where I think we kind of all agreed on this and I was gonna work on the language that didn't happen, but basically when a case remains open, I'm trying to think what that should be called. Like open case.
Maybe
or-
post adjudication services or case management services.
Post adjudication / case closure services. Something along those lines, because yeah, juvenile world gets a little bit weird with the adjudication stuff because it happens in the beginning of the case. So I just need to be there. So I think we have the basics here. So longer, I think the three things we need are 45 days longer if decided by the attorney or when the attorney determines the services are no longer needed. I think those are the three ways that we want to. So I guess that's not post adjudication or case closure. Maybe it's just almost end of services. Something. Oh, Patrick, go ahead.
And I don't know if I want to open this or if we want to open this can of worms, but I know PCRP in their manual, I do remember reading that there was when like a case manager or social worker, you lose contact with the client for 30 days, you close the case. And I don't know if we want to address that or if that's something that's going to end up being like a hard rule, because like here we don't, and I consult with the attorney and the attorney's like, nope, keep looking because you might find them. But I mean, that's another closure of case issue that we might run into.
Yeah, Becca.
It's nothing really. I was going to lower my hand. I was just thinking, in the adult criminal, it's very unusual when I see an attorney kind of ending services or saying no more services are needed for a case that is still open. And generally, once they have someone on it, they really like to have that additional support. So I think in 9 out of 10 cases, it is going to be at least 9 out of 10. It's going to be post adjudication services that we're addressing.
Dana, what were you gonna say?
Well, I was just going to say again, I mean, we see case managers and social workers as a limited resource for lawyers. They're not able to refer all of their cases. So I do think that we've been pretty firm about the closing of cases if the client hasn't engaged, so that we can make room for cases with clients that are ready to engage. So I would agree that Patrick, attorneys are very reluctant. They do not want us to close out cases, but we have to make room for new referrals. And so if one of our case managers hasn't had contact for 30 days, then we require that they close the case. It can be reopened, but.
So I wondered if we make this so the language I had here was kind of the may continue. And we don't, but the realities of the program may mean that we set some closing rules a little bit more firmly. But generally we want to approve work through may continue their work with the client. We'll just put the attorney as an out as just like one way to, because I have seen circumstances where the relationship between the attorney and case manager becomes quite difficult, and so that they have wanted to end that relationship. And so that's kind of what I was thinking. Lee, you're on mute.
I like the may because we're not requiring that services continue. You know, really at all, but certainly not beyond 45 days. It just gives the option of going longer if you consult with the lawyer and you
Yeah.
want to keep working with the client.
And I realized we went through the same conversation last time where the case manager is working at the direction of the attorney, so the attorney can say, we're done at any time. So I don't think we need to add that back in here. Does this seem to capture it? The case manager, social worker may continue their work with a client up to 45 days after the attorney has satisfied contractual post-judgment obligations or longer if decided by the attorney in consultation with the case manager or social worker. Great. So these were the two that standard 5. I think we kind of covered. This was the one like staying up to date on relevant information. If we're having people go to CLEs, do you think we're covered enough on that front that we don't need this kind of piece, or do we want something in there about kind of, you know, maintaining, staying current on whatever is happening in your area of work? Any thoughts?
I'm thinking back to, oh, go ahead, Dave.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I was thinking back to what you said earlier about like if we covered that in the job description already, like must stay abreast of local resources or something like that. Like, does that already cover it? Does this really need to be in here? That's my only thought.
Yeah, I would agree that it's in the description, and I think the continuing education will cover that.
Standard, what is labeled as 6 here, relationship with client. I was one that put that in there, and this was more kind of something that we see in juvenile sometimes, is remembering who the client is, especially when working with a child or a juvenile. But I don't know that it's necessary in this. But sometimes it can be easy to lose sight of what might be in a client's best interest versus advocating for what the client wants. And kind of remembering that role was where I was thinking on this type of a standard, but I also don't know if that is necessary. Not hearing much. Go ahead, Dana. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I don't know that it's necessary here. I think it's a really important training topic, especially for new folks coming into the work to remember. I mean, yeah, to remember that it's client-driven advocacy.
All right, so I'll remove it then. And the only thing I think that needs, besides kind of cleaning up maybe sentence structure, is deleting these things and then rewording this conflict of interest piece, which maybe somebody did while we were talking. No? All right. Let's see. Is there anything else before I try and kind of start typing this that we need to cover in terms of this stuff? The performance standards? Are we happy once this piece has been cleaned up? Are we happy with these? Are there any more we want to add or anything else we think we've missed? Cool.
I think it's good, and I'm actually impressed that we were able to pull this off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are really good documents here. We're going to find out tomorrow internally a little bit more about our actual timeline. And I think, because we talked about having an accompanying letter. And so I think what would make sense is essentially we can incorporate these into the document. And then kind of figure out a way to draft that. Any thoughts on that, or kind of feelings about that?
I think it's super important. I've been taking notes on sort of like the, I don't know, important but almost interstitial things that have not made it into these documents, but that I think should be conveyed to the commission. So I'm happy to. I would even be happy to like put a draft together, or Annie, if you want to do that. I definitely have things that I would want to add or highlight. And would we want to deliver that letter at the same time as these two documents?
Well, that's the hard part with this unknown deadline. I think we drafted, so I think there's a couple of things here, right? I don't know that we would be able to get it done by tomorrow in a way that we're all happy with, but I think that there are ways that it can be conveyed to the commission if it's not even through this, presented with this document necessarily. So what I think might make sense is we just start drafting it. We turn these ones in kind of as is, but let's say like the group wanted to draft a letter to accompany this, and that is continued work. But here's the basic information, because I think that's what we tried to do. What do people think about that? Okay. So, and with that kind of, and maybe that could be something that is handled a little bit more offline, like like if you want to draft it, Lee, and then we can kind of see what it looks like. If people think we need a meeting, then we can schedule something. And if not, we can kind of add and work together to create a document and then or kind of figure out the next steps on that. Does that seem reasonable to people? Okay. And then maybe email the group when you kind of upload your first draft, so people know to look for it. Okay.
Yeah.
And I can send you some of my notes and thoughts too on that. Oh, Dana, go ahead.
Well, I just had one final thought, and I don't know, it doesn't have to do with the letter, but around what the caseload standards are. And I don't know that in the attorney performance standards, if it's a number or what you guys use for like workload, or, we do the 80 in PCRP, but I just know that this is extremely hard work, and these are the most difficult cases that come through public defense offices. And if we don't put a limit on the number of clients that our case managers and social workers are working with, that it's not a sustainable practice. We're going to see a lot of turnover and burnout. So I don't know if this needs to go in the performance standards, but I just think that it's something, and those of you can, Michaela, or those of you that have worked under our models, we have 28 as a max, and folks feel like it's way too high.
I would agree it's way too high. I do get a lot of those, because I have the clinical license, I do get a lot of really, really hard cases where we're also having, parents with disabilities, which is a whole new realm. 28 is, for the amount of work that the attorneys expect me to do, and having to work with a system where the DHS turnover rate is just completely outrageous. 28 is just too much. I cannot give my clients the attention that I feel is ethical or that they deserve, because I just have so many that I'm just spread way too thin, and I feel bad for some of the clients that I have that need more attention than what I can give. So I've always really advocated for a lower caseload. 28's too high.
Yeah. Lee, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask that 28 number, someone's at my door. That 28 number, is that open cases, like an open workload model? And give me just 1 second.
Joys of working from home.
And another way that we talked about addressing this was through what we used to have was the PCRP Advisory Council. So I think we need a commitment to kind of revisit what appropriate caseloads are, or some language that we will do that.
Yeah, I think this would be good fodder for the letter to the commission. Like, hey, we didn't quite have time to do this now, but this needs to be addressed, and it probably needs to be lower than 28, or we're going to burn these people out.
Yeah, because I think Tara mentioned that for her, 35 was manageable, but I think it's also, a reminder too of like what, in some ways, we're not 100% sure how case managers and social workers will be used in this work, right? We have some experience in PCRP and juvenile, and with the McJERP, but like they're all limited to McJERP clients. And so this is, I agree. I think the letter might be a good place to say, as this field develops and we learn more, we're going to see kind of get a handle on an appropriate caseload beyond just a simple ratio. But I think this may be helpful from Dana and Shannon, information kind of about the beginning of PCRP and the struggle of finding people to do this work and the struggle of maintaining case managers. I don't know, maybe it might not be relevant for this letter, but it kind of ties into that of why this is important. Is we want this to be a workforce that is sustainable and like has people that want to come into it. The longer people stick around, the better they are at their work. So yeah. Okay. Cool. Do you guys want to watch me wordsmith through this one piece, or are you comfortable with me drafting something in the next little bit, sending it out for everyone to review tonight, and then us turning it in kind of what we have tomorrow? Does that work? Okay.
I think we
cool.
tried.
At least so far, right? Thanks. Yeah, so I'll do that and I'll clean this up, and because I also want to make sure Melissa and others kind of have a chance to look over what we did. And so I'll hopefully get this out before I leave today, and then we'll go from there. Does that sound good? Awesome. Thanks again. This was honestly, like, if you think back about where we started and how crazy this seemed, like, this is pretty cool that we came up with all of this. So thank you all for your hard work and willingness to show up.
Yeah, thank you so much.
We're all really proud of the work the groups have done.
Yeah, definitely.
Good.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right,
Thanks,
well,
y'all.
see y'all soon.
You.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, thanks.